President Donald Trump's administration threw a major curve Monday at a deal between Major League Baseball and the Cuban Baseball Federation that allowed Cuban players to play pro baseball in America without having to defect from the communist country. The landmark deal was struck during the Barack Obama presidency with an attempt to soften relations between the U.S. and Cuba, according to ESPN. The deal, which recognized the CBF as separate from the Cuban government, was also a way to end the trafficking of baseball players from Cuba into the United States. Under the deal, Major League Baseball teams paid a fee to the Cuban Baseball Federation for each player signed by each MLB team. However, the Office of Foreign Assets Control (OFAC), part of the Treasury Department, said the agreement violated U.S. trade law. The office sent a letter to Major League Baseball stating the Cuban Federation was, indeed, part of the Cuban government. Payments to the Cuban Baseball Federation are not authorized. Because a payment to the Cuban Baseball Federation is a payment to the Cuban government, the letter stated. Major League Baseball's front office responded with a letter, claiming the current deal was the best way for young athletes to avoid human trafficking. The objective is to end the dangerous trafficking of Cuban baseball players who desire to play professional baseball in the United States, the MLB said. Florida Sen. Marco Rubio said MLB's payments to Cuba was more like a ransom, and that the island nation wants legalized trafficking of persons. Rubio tweeted Monday, because MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred released a statement last December reiterating the league's path to baseball for Cuban athletes was a safe alternative. For years, Major League Baseball has been seeking to end the trafficking of baseball players from Cuba by criminal organizations by creating a safe and legal alternative for those players to sign with major league clubs, Manfred said. We believe that this agreement accomplishes that objective and will allow the next generation of Cuban players to pursue their dream without enduring many of the hardships experienced by current and former Cuban players who have played Major League Baseball. Cincinnati Reds outfielder Yasiel Puig, Chicago White Sox first baseman Jose Abreu and New York Mets outfielder Yoenis Cespedes are among the top Cuban players currently in the MLB. The stories of their risky journeys to the U.S. from Cuba were documented in the letter from MLB to OFAC. Some Cuban players, in an effort to make it to professional baseball in America, have moved to a third country and established citizenship before trying out for MLB teams. Then there are players like Aroldis Chapman, a closer for the New York Yankees. While playing on the Cuban national team in Rotterdam, Netherlands in 2009, he defected. 1 year earlier, he attempted to defect Cuba, but that plot was foiled, and he was eventually kept off the Cuban team for the 2008 Beijing Olympics, according to ESPN. Before Monday night's game in Houston, Chapman spoke through a translator about the move by the Trump administration. "I just feel bad for those young ball players who are probably not going to have the same chance to play here. It's definitely difficult for a lot of Cuban players who are not playing at this level here in the States. But the way we got here, it was tough, to say the least." Chapman said. "The biggest impact is going to be the guys who are back in Cuba. For me and a lot of our fellow Cuban players who have already established ourselves here in this country, we're fortunate enough to have our families here. It really doesn't affect us here. We've been lucky." The Trump administration's rescinding the deal comes as the Cuban government continues backing the regime of Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro, who has a stronghold on the South American country after claiming victory in the latest election. The United States and dozens of other countries have recognized Juan Guaido as Venezuela's new leader. Since then, the Maduro regime has cut off humanitarian aid, electricity and humanitarian supplies to most of its residents who haven't defected. Though the U.S. has launched economic sanctions against Venezuela, the country is still getting resources brought in by other countries, including Cuba. Now that the Trump administration has repealed the MLB deal with Cuba, Cuban players hoping to land on an American team will need a license to exempt them from the prohibition, which means applying through the Treasury Department, according to NBC News.